Alright, let me start off by saying that I am one of the people who welcomed the change from 6v6 to 5v5 on Overwatch right from the beginning. From the moment I was able to get my hands on the Overwatch 2 beta, I immediately felt like there was just something so good about Overwatch 2. That there being that with one less tank, the game was a lot more brawlier. It felt like I was doing a lot more no matter who I was. You didn't have two shields to fight over, and with one tank on each team, things really felt a lot more, I guess, open. And with the new push game mode, things just felt a lot more dynamic compared to Overwatch 1. I don't know, something about two tanks just kind of made the game feel a little slow. And removing one tank did change the game a lot, as far as my opinion goes. A lot of people didn't see it that way, they still kind of see it as just the same game. But as far as like that nuanced feeling goes, I still heavily preferred Overwatch 2's one tank rule over Overwatch 1. I thought that it was a breath of fresh air, and for somebody who actually likes playing DPS as well as tank, I personally think that it was actually a very good decision to make. That being said, now that we're 2 seasons into the game, we kind of need to discuss about something that to me kind of drives me up the wall. And in my opinion, Blizzard really needs to tone down the tank diff that exists in Overwatch 2's meta at the moment. Because when the tank diff is real, you can really feel it. And it feels like your time is being wasted the moment you notice it. And let me explain. So at this very moment, with Roadhog doing as much damage as he can and the fact that he can actually eliminate players very easily, there exists a tank meta that can be visualized as rock, paper, scissors. Roadhog, of course, is seen as one of the best tanks at the moment because of the sheer damage output that he can do, and he can be very unstoppable because of how difficult he is to kill. So what do you do when there's a Roadhog dominating your team? You switch to Orisa. What happens when somebody's dominating as Orisa? You switch to Zarya. What happens when somebody's dominating as Zarya? You switch to Monkey. What happens when somebody's dominating as Monkey? You switch to Roadhog. Rinse and repeat. Of course, this is a very simplified way of looking at things. I am leaving out a lot of characters like Doomfist, Sigma, and Ramatra, but these characters are honestly good on their own and they don't really have a good guaranteed counterpick like these other 4. But this simplified counterpick meta is what you'll mostly see, and it's a good general rule of thumb when it comes to the Overwatch 2 tank meta at the moment. And if you know this and you have this information in your back pocket, then more than likely, there isn't going to be that much of a problem. The game is mostly going to be determined by your skill. If you know how to play the majority of the tanks in that square meta, then you'll be able to most likely be able to counter any kind of strategy that the enemy might do. However, if you don't, that's where the problem happens. And that's where my problem arises with the tank role, because a tank diff can pretty much determine the quality of the game. If a tank is significantly worse than the other tank, and let's just say that maybe they don't know anything about the meta and they're choosing somebody who's weak against the enemy tank, then more than likely that game is set and done. You already know who's going to win because without a strong tank to dominate the battlefield, then the DPS won't have that sponge to rely on in order for them to be able to make their move, and supports are going to have to continuously try to keep the tank alive while the DPS are left in the dust. And thus the house of cards falls down, and more than likely your team is gonna lose. And that's what I think. I think the tank role is just a little bit too powerful, because the moment you have a tank that isn't able to keep up, then you know that you either have to compensate to deal with the lack of the tank's performance, which isn't always possible, or just accept the fact that you lost and then have to spend the rest of the match kind of in that mellow state. Because I think we've all been in that situation where either a tank refuses to change or maybe they just don't know how to play a certain character. And I know that's exactly how people felt when I played Reinhardt for way too much starting Season 2. Season 1, I was able to keep up, I was able to do stuff, but coming with Season 2 and the fact that Reinhardt is just, decimated in the meta at the moment, I could feel that I wasn't doing what I needed to do. So of course I just started learning other tanks in order to keep up with the rest of the player base. So at least, I wouldn't be such a burden on everybody else in the match. I think one thing that I do appreciate about Overwatch 1 is the fact that if one tank was lacking a little, at least the other tank was able to compensate, since they had around similar amounts of power, or maybe you just didn't really need that much. Also, not to mention that tanks in Overwatch 1 were a lot easier to kill compared to Overwatch 2. Plus, I think that the raw power that all these tanks have nowadays is exactly the reason why we have the meta in the first place. If tanks weren't such a determining factor, we wouldn't have this whole rock, paper, scissors thing that would be necessary for us to, do our jobs. Obviously, this whole rock, paper, scissors kind of meta came about because of how much we needed to stop Roadhog. Because Roadhog is just really powerful with that boost of health and that boost of healing. And you know what? Maybe that was the culprit, just making tanks way too beefy. I think maybe if they lowered down values back to Overwatch 1 levels, it really wouldn't be too bad. I mean, keep all the other power things, but don't keep the health that high. At least this way, it would keep tanks from being too dominating, I mean, sure, they would still be the focus of attention, but they wouldn't necessarily have to absolutely control the ebb and flow of the game. I mean, they could still be, the tip of the spear, but they don't necessarily have to be, the fucking titan of the team. Though I still see why they kind of needed to do that, because otherwise, tank wouldn't feel as powerful, especially all alone and stuff. And instead, I think the DPS class would be the one that would be dominating the most. But at the same time, I'm just thinking, maybe that's a bad idea. Maybe, lowering the power of the tank is just going to make the game far worse. I mean, DPS is already kind of dominating as much already, with characters like Sojourn and Junkrat who just, deal insane amounts of damage. I don't want tanks to be useless, I just want them to be slightly less significant. And if reducing the health means that it would make the game worse, then maybe instead of reducing health, maybe they should just be reduced in power. Or maybe just, take off a little bit of both. Who knows, really? I don't know the answer. I'm not sure if you do. If you do have your own opinion about that, please leave it in the comment section below. How do you feel about that? But I will say that at the very least, on paper and from the few experiences that I've had on Quick Play, playing tank is a lot of fun. However, I do know that it just isn't, the most healthy way to balance the game, I think. I think at the current state, the tank role really just needs a huge rework. At the very least, to understand exactly, how to make it so that tanks stay powerful and stay the tip of the spear, be that influential marker, but not so much so that it majorly, influences the way the game is gonna turn out. Because I'm sure that many of you have already had a time when a tank had to either, leave because of a disconnection error, connection to server kind of thing that happens fucking often. I don't know why Blizzard fixed your servers, or they just rage quit because they're getting tank diffed hard. And so now you're just 2 DPS and 2 supports going against another tank and 2 DPS and 2 other supports. Obviously, you're only going to lose because now you're facing off not only, 2 DPS who can probably kill you in one hit, but you also have that tank who just has an insane amount of health. Put that on top 2 supports that could possibly heal them quicker than you can kill them, and it almost becomes impossible because you don't have that sponge to take all that damage for you. Instead, he's gone. He disconnected because of, either getting angry or because of Blizzard servers. Now you are entirely fucked. And that's how it feels even in the regular game when a tank dies. And that's why a tank diff is just so determining of how bad a match is going to turn out. So that's just it. Tank really needs a rework in just how dominating it is. I think it just needs to be reeled back just a little. Just kind of like a flat nerf or something. I don't know exactly what it would have to be. I think maybe that health change would be nice. But now I'd like to hear from you. What's your opinion on this? What do you think about the tank role? Do you think it's as dominating as I'm making it out to be? Make sure to leave a comment on whether or not you agree or disagree. If you found this video interesting, like it if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it. If you'd like to see more content just like this, make sure to subscribe. And if you'd like to, support this channel, I do have a Patreon in the description. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my fellow patrons, and I will talk to you guys later.